Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jax McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So what we're doing this time, it's the same drill as normally. I'm going to give you my top 10 thoughts from the previous week of college football. I know we took a little bit of a break there, but we have returned to that format at least for this week. So that's going to be the main meat and potatoes of this particular video. But also, if you're interested, at the very end, we'll go over my predictions from last week, how I did score-wise, where I'm looking for the year, and if you can't already tell, Nebraska did help me out, and so that's why I'm wearing their shirt. They got one of my correct predictions. But before we get into any of that, I do want to make sure that you're hitting subscribe, liking the video, all that good stuff, because it does help me out quite a bit, and I'm just trying to grow the channel. So we can't start this video without first addressing the largest game in college football, not only last week, but this season as a whole. The biggest game we've had to this point was undoubtedly Georgia versus Tennessee. That's a no-brainer. It's a simple answer there. The big thing I want to point out here, I predicted against Georgia last week. I've been predicting against them all season. I called them one of my most overrated teams to start the year. I very clearly had a whole bunch of questions about this Bulldogs team, if they could restack and reload as opposed to rebuild. That's a buzz phrase. But if that was an option, or if they were going to take a step back and, be maybe a two-loss team this year and miss the college football playoffs or whatever it was, they very clearly aren't going to do that. And I just want to go ahead and issue a congratulations to Georgia right now, because if this is the team we see on the field every single week from here on out, they are your national champions. Again, I was not on the UGA train this year. I'm going to be the first one to admit it. I was not a believer. I like Kirby Smart. I didn't know if he was quite ready to be, kind of jump up to that top tier with what we typically see from Bama and Clemson, both teams that we'll get to talk about a little bit later on, but he's very clearly done that. Look at that game. Tennessee's offense, one of, if not the best in the nation. You've obviously got that debate with Ohio State. They couldn't do anything against the Bulldogs. They looked confused. They looked like they had never played with each other before. They struggled mightily right out of the gate, couldn't find a rhythm, and ultimately that kind of was the theme throughout the game. It was mistake after mistake after mistake, especially within that first half. UGA's offense looked super comfortable after that first drive. They kind of figured it out, got things moving, got a bunch of touchdowns, built up a lead that Tennessee just didn't have answers for. They couldn't come back from it. So, you hear a lot of smack talked on Stetson Bennett's name, and you need to remove that, because he's proving weekly that while he might not be the most talented quarterback, while he might not have the most potential under center in the SEC or in college football, he's going to go out there and he's going to manage games and he's going to win some games for you. And that's about all you can ask for from a quarterback like that, and he's doing that, and he's doing it very, very well. The talent on this team and what the talent they possess, plus how well they stepped up to that big moment. They knew that everybody, even though the lines weren't reflective of it, was doubting Georgia. That was a simple nature of this game, and we can't doubt them anymore. We can't say, well, that Missouri game, well, that such and such, well, that this and that. They came in there, played who they had across the field, and dominated who they had across the field. Simple as that. Congratulations to Georgia if that's the team you keep on the field. But while we are talking about this game, I've got a very clear breaking point to the team that was on the other sideline. The Tennessee Volunteers lost their game. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is what happened. But when you look at what happened around the rest of college football, you feel pretty good if you're a Volunteers fan as to potentially getting back into the college football playoffs and maybe not even dropping out of the rankings at all. If we're being honest, there's an entire possibility that they don't fall. I mean, look at how TCU was treated in those in the first CFP show, and then look at Clemson, how they were kind of on the frets, and they obviously lost their game. Bama was still in that top spot, potentially being one of the first couple teams out. They will no longer be in that position. So when you boil it all down, Tennessee's still got the best resume of any one-loss team in the country. They probably have the best resume of any team in the country, and that in and of itself, only being a one-loss team, that one loss coming to the top team in the country, should make you feel pretty good about at least playing college football playoff football. You know what I mean? I know I said football twice there, but being able to participate in the CFP is a very alive thing. And all they got to do is win the rest of their games. They don't have to worry about the SEC championship. They don't have to worry about, any more truly elite teams on their schedule. Alabama and Georgia are probably the only other two truly elite. I'm still not an LSU guy. That's not changing right now, even though they did win an incredible game. Again, we'll talk about that. But Tennessee, I would still have as my at least second. You can make an argument that whenever you're not having to play in Athens, that game goes a whole lot differently, but I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see on if that comes to fruition. That's kind of the big thing that I took away from that game, even despite the fact that I led this show off with Georgia. I sat back and looked at it at the end of the night and was like, wait a minute. Tennessee could absolutely still be number 4 when the college football playoff rankings come out later this week, and maybe that's what we'll see. Who knows? I'm not a part of the committee. I'm not the one pulling the strings or making the decisions there. Could absolutely be something that turns real whenever we hit that time. So while we're in the SEC and while we're talking about Southeastern Conference football, we've got one more game. We've obviously got to touch on LSU and Alabama. And while I should probably use this time to issue LSU fans and the school an apology, which I will do very briefly right now, I did not credit you enough coming into this game. I did not credit Death Valley enough. That's the real sticking point for me. I still don't just love LSU as a team. I think Brian Kelly is going to be a better hire than I anticipated. I think that he is surprisingly fitting in very well there. His coaching staff looks good. He's doing a good job. His recruiting class is coming along quite nice. But when you really get down to the meat and potatoes of this game, it wasn't that LSU was the better team necessarily. It's that Alabama doesn't know how to handle an atmosphere this year. I mean, look at the games that they've struggled in this season. You went to Austin to play the Longhorns. You beat them barely, and you needed a very sketchy roughing the passer call to do so. You went to Neyland Stadium, Tennessee beats you. You go to Death Valley, LSU beats you. There's a common theme through all of those near losses or losses, and that common theme is that they have some of the loudest fans in the country in college football, potentially outside of soccer or English football or international football. There you go. Outside of those guys, because I know they get wild, but in American sports, those might be 3 of the 7, 8, 9, 10 loudest places to play. I don't think that that's outlandish. College football is a different level than the NFL as far as atmosphere, and 3 of those stadiums are absolute bucket list places to go if you are just a pure college football fan. It's not Bryce, it's not Will Anderson Jr., but there's a lot of players on the field for the Crimson that just don't know how to handle that atmosphere yet. You could feel it through the TV screen. I was not present for that game, but you could feel that something was not quite right there. You know what I mean? Like, it was such a strange vibe whenever you watch that game because Alabama couldn't get their footing because that noise was just so disruptive that at the end of the day, the Crimson Tide just couldn't hang on with it. Good news for Alabama. Ole Miss is not the same atmosphere as those other 3. It's just not. I respect the Rebels. I respect the program that Lane Kiffin is putting on the field, but that fan base does not hold the same amount of weight as LSU, Texas, and Tennessee do. Simple fact. Sorry. I think that that's a pretty understood thing. That's not me trying to discredit Ole Miss. That's just me saying it how it is. That won't be as much of a fear for me, at least, when Alabama gets onto the field. The Iron Bowl, though, that could be a different story entirely. That's one that you should really keep your eyes peeled on because when that game comes to time, Alabama is going to have shown the most weakness they've shown in many years. And Auburn is currently living life without Jamie Chadwell. They showed a lot of resilience in their last game. could be something to watch. Who knows? We'll talk about it when we get there. But until that time, I want to go outside of the SEC for a little bit. I want to talk about what we've been seeing from the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And I know I've talked about this a couple times. I think this exact point has been coming up at least once prior. But man, I mean, you have to tip your cap to the season you've been seeing from the Fighting Irish, because it is perhaps the coolest storyline in college football this year, bar none. I think that watching Notre Dame take all of that adversity and all of that trash talk and all of that doubt after those first 2 weeks, and then slowly but surely work their way back up the mountaintop. And did they have their struggles? Yes. They lost to Stanford. Yeah, it happened. We have to acknowledge that. But to watch them take out North Carolina, to watch them figure it out against Cal, to watch them come in and play Clemson in a game that nobody thought they had a spitting chance in, myself including, and win it, and to get over the hump and to prove that they are still such a good football program, you don't get to write that kind of stuff. That stuff happens naturally. It happens very few times within a lifetime, and Notre Dame is living proof of it. From a potential first-year fire to the savior of South Bend. If Marcus Freeman ever writes a biography, he can take that one from me. I'm not going to charge him for it, but I mean, wow. He is showing everybody why he got that job. And I get that you have some struggles. Maybe it's because, he's a first-year head coach. Maybe you think maybe that had something to do with what we saw on the field early on. Maybe he didn't quite have his feet underneath him, but now that he does, he is absolutely running like Usain Bolt. He has made it. He's made the university feel like Notre Dame again, and really feel like they've got some important fun stat that I keep seeing on Twitter. It took Marcus Freeman 9 games to win his first top 5 game, or win a game over a top 5 opponent. It took Brian Kelly 11 years to do that. Just a funny stat. I mean, he just got probably the biggest win of his career on Saturday as well, so I'm not going to take anything away from him, but it's certainly funny, and if you hadn't seen it, you at least needed to hear it. But the way these people, and I don't want to say kids because I am 21 years old, but the way these kids play for him, it's absurd. They are playing like truly elite talent, which some of them probably aren't. If we're being honest, Notre Dame is a very hard place to recruit at, because not only do you have to be physically gifted and be a stud on the field, you have to be super freaking smart. You have to be so intelligent to get onto the field, to be a part of that football team, to be in that university. So it's a very hard place to recruit, but you wouldn't guess it by the way they're playing. And I mean, yeah, Clemson had their typical quarterback issues, helped them out a ton, but Notre Dame showed a lot of tenacity and poise and the things you need to see from a great team, and they beat the Giant. They had them on the ropes, and it's a real easy situation. We saw it with Syracuse, where Clemson rallies back. They start to get comfortable. Syracuse loses that grip. Notre Dame didn't do that, my friends. Notre Dame went out there and beat them fair and square in the middle of the field, and they got to walk out of there as winners. That's how incredible that story has become. Again, you can't write that. You cannot write what Notre Dame is doing. And I'm truly excited to see what happens moving forward with Marcus Freeman. Maybe even more interested to see what happens with old Tommy Rees, because he probably won't want to be an offensive coordinator for the rest of his days. So does he maybe take a call from another university? Who knows? But for now, if I was an Irish fan, as I would imagine at least a couple of you might be, I would enjoy what you're watching, and I would enjoy just the overall atmosphere around your university. Something I would not be enjoying is if I was a Wake Forest fan, if I was a Clemson fan, if I was a Miami fan, Syracuse. That list kind of continues to go on, and what do they all have in common? Well, yeah, they're all ACC teams. And watching the ACC from beginning to not quite the end, but where we're at this part in the year, has been so interesting, yet so strange, yet almost so sad. I mean, the ACC was led by Clemson, who was having these having to go deep into their bag to get these wins. That was having to fight till the bitter end to fight opponents that, quite frankly, they should have been blowing out of the water. They have now fallen to an opponent who, while yes, I was giving praise to Notre Dame, they are worse than Clemson. I think we can all kind of come to a collective agreement there that is kind of a fact. It's an opinionated thing that could be perceived as fact when you really get into the deep of it. But just looking around the conference, and I know NC State won. They look all right, but you got to remember Devin Leary's gone there too. So a lot of the important part of this conference this year, the things we wanted to watch, the things we thought we needed to know, have dissipated, and they've fallen apart rather quickly. I just don't really understand why it's happening. I mean, it's not a talent issue, but you're seeing so many folks fall off the top of the cliff. Really, the only team left that I think is performing at a level that could potentially beat, I'm trying to think of how to word this, a team that I think could still beat someone who is on paper better than them, because I don't think Clemson can do that anymore. I think North Carolina might be the only one left that I feel confident in saying could win a bowl that they're almost punching up into. And even that's kind of shaky because we watched their defense fold to App State, and I get that was the beginning of the year. But we've seen them struggle at times with lesser than opponents. They just kind of have this certain level of energy that gives some credence and gives some hope towards that team. And yeah, the Tar Heels and Clemson, they remain relatively untouched as far as the ACC champ game goes. They're pretty far out ahead of the rest of the competition. But the Tar Heels struggled. I mean, even most recently this weekend, they couldn't even hardly put Virginia away. You can't not mention Miami, like I did earlier, and Florida State, who is looking decent, but they've had a pretty seismic drop from where we thought they were going to be, especially after that first week of football, because they were the first team to beat LSU. So, you look at it, it's not quite the level of what you were hoping for once you saw that first game and once you started to see some of it follow up in a, dare I say, elite year for college football and college football parity. The ACC has been the neglected stepchild of college football. They have been the ones kind of pushed aside, and you almost can forget about them this year because while, yes, you're going to have plenty of bowl teams from that specific conference, it doesn't feel like we've got any real sharks in the water in the Atlantic coast. So we're going to go back now to more specific game type stuff, and I want to talk about what was not supposed to be a real game, not even one I had on my radar to speak about the following Monday or Tuesday after Saturday wrapped up. But man, Ohio State and Northwestern, a lot of people are getting kind of weird about that situation. Well, Michigan should be put above them, and well this, and well that, and well whatever. This is absolutely a game you give Ohio State a mulligan for. The wind out there was absurd, and while I've not been the biggest Ohio State guy this year, this is not a game that really lessened my opinion of them. They're a pass-first team. We know this. Their offensive line has not been great. We also know this. So whenever you have to put it on the ground, yeah, you're going to have some issues, obviously. That's what happens whenever you're throwing in, 50-mile-an-hour winds, something like that. That's not a direct number, but I feel like I remember hearing that maybe. I know that it was absurd one way or the other. Does not matter the miles per hour. It was an issue for both teams. You can look at the box score and see it very clearly, even if you didn't have to watch the game. You can't pass the ball in that. The ground attack has certainly been lacking something, but hey, C.J. Stroud, even though he does not like running, did it. He stepped up for his team and said, look, man, if I have to run, I'll run. And that's what they did, and they won. It's just, it's one of those situations. Mayan Williams, also, you got to give him a big pat on the back. He looked pretty all right whenever he was out there as well. They don't really get penalized for this. The top 10 drop like flies, too, if I, give credit to Tennessee or at least say that they should feel pretty good about being in the college football playoffs despite getting manhandled. I can't, in good faith be like, well, Ohio State should be worried because they won their game against Northwestern, but it wasn't by enough. No, I'm not here to do that. But in the same breath, I think Michigan, whether or not the fans are really in agreement with it, they should probably also get a mulligan for that game, strictly because of how close it was going into halftime with a team that was much worse to them than Rutgers. And yeah, you can be like, well, what about the Penn State game? Well, Penn State's a very good football team, and you could see that everything that they had produced out there was pretty lucky. If we're being just 100% transparent here, a lot of what you saw from Penn State's offense on that night, and more specifically their defense, was bad. Rutgers was not really, they didn't really possess that same vibe to me. They were actually kind of keeping up for a little bit. And, obviously the final score was not a particularly pretty one. Michigan won in hand, but you still got to remember things like that. And yeah, second half adjustments are a thing, but you're supposed to be leaps and bounds better than these teams. So you do have to play who's in front of you, but you've got to play them to the level that convinces me that you should be a top 2 seed in college football playoffs. Not something I really feel like Michigan did. Ironically enough, and I don't think that they'll like this comparison, but they kind of did the same thing Ohio State did against teams like Penn State and Iowa and Notre Dame. Like, they backloaded the numbers with a bunch of garbage time / we built up this lead, now just keep piling on and keep piling on. It wasn't really like a tick for tack thing. It wasn't like an early we get out in front and we're not just going to stop scoring the ball. It was like, that was scary. Now let's boost how this looks so nobody realizes that we were, 2 quarters of football away from, walking out of here very sad and very angry at ourselves. So it was ugly. Not something I would be proud of if I was a Michigan fan. Not something I'd be proud of if I was Jim Harbaugh. But, it was a bad weekend for CFP hopefuls all around, and they survived. They rallied, made it a big score gap. You got to learn from it. You got to move on. So I've kind of isolated one conference already to this point, and I've been talking about conferences kind of as a broken up point within this video. I started with the SEC and then moved to the obviously Notre Dame and then the ACC, kind of because they were kind of an ACC school for half a second there. That was our Big Ten portion. Now I want to talk about the Big 12, more specifically, who's the second best team in the Big 12? I don't have an answer for that. That's a question to you guys. And a couple of these are going to be questions to you guys. This last little bit will be, because I don't really know who the second best team in that conference is anymore, despite the fact that it was probably the most fun conference through the vast majority of the season. Oklahoma State's downfall is absurd. It's confusing, so you really can't say that they're second best anymore. Texas beat Kansas State, but they also got caught by Oklahoma State and Texas Tech. Baylor lost hope early. They're making a little bit of a run back. This conference just as a whole fell out of form. Bit like ACC, not to the same level, but they still got a little bit of hope as well at the top. TCU has not fallen off the cliff yet. They're still undefeated. They're underdogs against Texas, which will be a very interesting thing to watch unfold. I'm not going to be calling any lines makers idiots. I'll tell you that for free. And if you didn't watch the last episode, you will soon see why I'm saying that. But They need TCU to go undefeated at this point. This conference does, because anything beyond it is not just the most reassuring thing that you're looking at. And you'll notice that while I did mention them, but I did not really talk about them as the second best team in the Big 12, I want to talk about the Longhorns for a second. More specifically, who are the Texas Longhorns? Because, man, I don't understand. Are they rising up to the occasion, but whenever the occasion's not there, they kind of fall flat? Or what are we looking at here? The offense is potent most of the time. The defense is solid some of the time. And they're consistent none of the time. It's one of those teams where every single week you get a different gauge on them, and not in like the sense of, well, this player's playing well today, but they weren't last time. It's like, no, they have a completely different identity and completely different issues going on. It doesn't really make any cohesive sense to me. Whenever I sit down and watch Texas football, I'm like, well, where did that come from? Or where did that go? You know what I mean? Like, it's so back and forth and strange, and I don't get it. Maybe part of that is because Quinn Ewers has shown quite a bit of his inexperience, which is, in and of itself is worrisome. because if you're trying to make a late push to get a prominent bowl game, you're also going to have to roll out there with an inexperienced quarterback, which could lead for some pretty bad looks in those important stages. I don't really know how Quinn Ewers plays in his important games. I don't think we've really seen that yet. I don't know that he's seen just a ton of, quote, important games, because every game that Texas has been in this year, other than Alabama when he got hurt, didn't really feel all that seismic to me. But maybe that's because I'm not a part of the fan base. I don't know. Regardless, they're on this weird wave of, they're almost like, I think of their season almost as like a bowling ball in the middle of a waterbed. Like the waterbed's moving around and the bowling ball is kind of sliding and doing this and doing that. There's no real structural integrity to it. There's nothing really that I feel comfortable basing anything off of with this Longhorns team. So it's a kind of a bi-weekly basis, and it makes me feel like I am not safe in betting any game or putting on my predictions in any game that Texas is a part of. So it's definitely alarming on that front. Kind of eliminates part of it, but yeah, I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see what they do against TCU. Maybe they come in there and beat them. Who knows? So kind of the overarching theme here was that a lot of huge teams fell in college football this last week. A lot of conferences even have been severely damaged by that. But the real question that I have, and the last one I want to ask you guys, is who is the Heisman favorite at this point? I know a lot of stuff has been kind of up in the air with Hendon Hooker following that game. That was not the performance befitting of a Heisman. CJ Stroud, even though I gave his team a mulligan, came out there and threw like 70 yards on less than 50% completion. That's not going to look good for you. And I've got a couple different options from a bunch of different conferences that I think could at least make interesting arguments down the road, especially if their teams end up doing pretty good. Blake Corum is another one of those guys that his line wasn't particularly impressive, so you kind of don't dock him too much for that. I think he still had like 4-point-something yards per carry and a little over 100 yards, but it wasn't, again, like running backs have to have such gaudy numbers to be a Heisman, and that wasn't really gaudy, so it kind of puts some worry into you. So who does that really leave? Well, you got Bo Nix maybe, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr. Those are all my guys that I'm looking at for the Pac-12. They've all had really good seasons, but Michael Penix Jr. is coming off of a week where he looked flat, so even that's worrying. Corum and C.J. Stroud, they're not out of it. Hendon still leads for the SEC options. I don't really see a whole lot of anything else coming up through the ranks there. I don't think Stetson Bennett is Heisman level, but I do think he is a good quarterback. Drake May has some potential. That's a name to remember. I like what resume he has put together and what numbers he's putting together, so that could be interesting, especially as we get into the late stages of it. I could absolutely see him being a finalist, so who knows? And then Max Duggan doesn't get talked about enough. He's been having a great year at TCU as their quarterback. Just the overall feeling here is that the race is as open as it's been in a while, for me at least. So that will be not really a main thing to keep track of, but definitely something to have stored in the back of your mind as we get closer to handing out the awards. So speaking of awards, I'm not going to be getting any for my predictions recaps, whether it be this week or throughout the year. I went 3-7. Again, I mentioned Nebraska was one of the teams that I got right at the top of this video. They covered versus Minnesota. Washington steals Oregon State's number, and then UCF gets a little bit of a scare from Memphis. The wrong is a laundry list. Tennessee levels up and beats Georgia. Not happening. Oklahoma State, don't even want to finish that one because it's going to make me sad. Alabama embarrasses LSU. Nope. Kansas State makes the odds makers look like idiots. I told you that you would find out why I was saying that, and there you go. Clemson gets another signature gritty win versus Notre Dame. Wake Forest bounces back. Kentucky crushes Mizzou. So that continues. I believe I'm just barely over the cusp of 40% right now. So 40% is not the worst. It's not where I want to be. And hopefully I can kind of build up brownie points back whenever we look at my overall, because I've still got my top 25 to break out. I've still got my underrated teams and overrated teams and, a bunch of different stuff that we'll get to talk about at the end of the year. And I will be counting every single bowl game towards my record this year. We'll break that up into a bunch of different videos. I don't know how we're going to do that yet, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But for now, that is episode 47. Yep, 47 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.